Good morning, church. We are back in St. Mark's Gospel. We've been having a lot of high holy days the last 2 Sundays, but we're back in Mark. And I think that when we read this story, maybe if you're from a certain generation, it's easy to be offended. And what I mean by that is maybe you've read this story and you've been taught that you need to give, quote, all you have to live on, end quote, to be a good Christian. And to be sure, giving is a part of the Christian life. You see that in St. Paul's epistles especially. But to give all we have, if we give all we have, how are we to make a living? Just to be crass about it. Well, what if I told you that's not what's quite going on here? That reading that's popular, that the point of this story is to give all we have. What about this? I contend that this morning we're going to learn that Jesus condemns bad religion and vindicates the widow. And I think once we understand what that sentence means, we might learn something new about Jesus today. But before going into telling you what I mean by that sentence, I want to discuss the context of our reading. This is in the broader context of Jesus entering Jerusalem, beginning with the 11th chapter of our gospel. If you were to browse the chapter, if you were to skim it, you'd notice that Jesus is aggressively condemning the religious system of the time and often gets in conflict with the leaders of said system. He curses the fig tree as symbolic of the leader's failure to act justly. He cleanses the temple, which, if you have to cleanse something, it implies that it's dirty in the first place. He gets into arguments with the religious leaders. And remember, arguments in the ancient world, they're just not arguments, they're trying to make you look bad. And so the religious leaders want to make Jesus look bad, but Jesus won't stand for it. Therefore, as we work through this passage, keep in mind Jesus' attitude towards the religious system in Jerusalem. It is arguably one of condemnation. He is not pleased with how things are currently operating. But what's he condemning? Let's look at our passage to see if we can answer that question. Jesus has harsh words to give the scribes, the scribes being the people who studied the Torah and taught it. In a sense, they were literally lawyers in that sense, because they studied the law and they taught it. He warns the disciples to beware the scribes. Why? Well, let's look at this description of the scribes that Jesus gives. They wear long robes. And so when you read this, they only wore the finest clothes, only the finest silks. This assumes that they were very expensive. So a lot of money to look good. To translate it to our modern day, they only wore Armani. They did not shop at Target, let alone Goodwill. Which, by the way, nothing wrong with Goodwill. I found nice pieces there. They like, quote, greetings in the marketplace, which, in our context, if you want to, scratch that. In ancient Israel, if you were a person in authority, you did not say hello first. People said hello to you first. In fact, I think in the Talmud, there's one rabbi, he was famous because he said hello first. He was famed for his humility. And so the scribes, Jesus is saying, they wanted everyone to know how important they were. They wanted to go to the most public place, because you had to go to the marketplace, you had to get your shopping done. And they wanted to make sure in their nice clothes that everyone knew how important and how wealthy they were. And so the scribes were very much, they were vain, to be frank. They were concerned with how people perceived them. Continuing this, they had the best seats in the synagogue. Again, the best seats, they were up in the front facing the congregation. If you go to an Episcopal church, this tradition sort of continues with the bishop's chair. You have like a giant chair right there. That's where the bishop goes. Not condemning the bishop's chair. I'm just saying that's a modern analog. The rabbis wanted to sit in the bishop's chair. They wanted everyone to know how important they were. And not only the bishop's chair, but that chair was located in front of the ark where the Torah was, in front of this holy object. So, you are who you know. Well, the rabbi, they are who they're sitting next to or what they're sitting next to. So they're rich, they have a lot of honor, and they're holy. They're very pious. They ate well, too, because they wanted the good seating at the banquets. And again, the good seating was for the guest of honor. And again, reinforcing that the scribes were not content to be nobody, they had to be somebody. Because, well, they were rich. And they wanted everyone to know it. But how were they rich? How did they get that money? I think verse 40 gives us a clue. They devour widows' houses. That's a graphic image. Could you imagine a person eating a house in one go? But that's what the scribes did, according to Jesus. Jesus is in saying that they took everything from the least of these, the widows, which, when you think of the widow, in ancient Israel, that is the poorest person, not only financially, but socially. They had no man to defend them. They had no money. They were living on a fixed income. Nobody cared about them. And the scribes just took their money. But it's okay, because they would pray very loud all the time. They were very pious. Don't you know, they sat in the synagogue. And everyone likes them. But Jesus sees right through the scribes. He sees someone concerned with wealth and influence and calls it out in public for God and the world to see. He has no patience for thievery. And maybe this might make us uncomfortable. That's the point of the second half of our reading, verses 41 through 44. He's not lauding the widow for sacrificing, quote, all she has. In fact, quite the opposite. Because remember, the widow in the Bible is archetypical of the poorest of the poor. But here comes the widow giving all she had to the temple, hoping that God would bless her. But of course, we already saw that the scribes eat widows' houses. And remember, Jesus is right next to the offering, the treasury, so he could see this going on. What was that money in the temple for that the widow is donating? In a sense, it was a welfare fund. It was to help people like the widow. But wait a minute, the scribes work at the temple. Where are the scribes getting the money? They're skimming some off of the top. The widow giving everything she had, and that's what it says, everything she had, how is she going to make the living? The scribes taking all the money the widow has and using it for himself. And so, when you see this sandwiched in between the destruction of the temple, which we'll discuss next week, and the condemnation of the scribes that we see this week, this passage that we see in verses 41 through 44, Jesus is saying, look, case in point, they're going to do it again. Another widow being fleeced by this scribe. Tell me that I'm wrong. And that's what I mean when I say that Jesus condemns bad religion. Because, church, it's very easy to appear pious while you steal somebody's money. I think a lot of televangelists do this all the time. Indeed, it's easy to present yourself as if God is on your side as you ruin other people's lives. Church, it's very easy for me to wear this collar and walk around in public and think I'm more important than everyone else outside this church. And indeed, I'm sure that many of you have stories of church leadership that appear one way, but then act another. But Jesus condemns bad religion. He will not let God's name be taken in vain. Saying that, I think it's easy to point the finger, but like the saying say, one finger goes out, four fingers go in. That's not quite the saying, but you get what I mean. I do think there is a reckoning we have to wrestle with. And at least, and this is anecdotal, I think one of the reasons people leave the church is because of bad religion. Maybe the church stole their money. Maybe the pastor took advantage of them in ways that can't be mentioned in polite company. Maybe the parishioners acted in one way, but acted, or rather presented themselves in one way, but acted another. And to be sure, like there's excuses that we can make. I mean, arguably churches need money to function. I've heard the one that pastors are God's anointed, which I'm not a fan of that, but people use it, so they need to be listened to. Or, you know, the classic, and I've never quite liked this, we're all sinners, which is true, we are all sinners. But church, we have to wrestle with the fact that if we say we represent Jesus here on earth, and we don't act like Jesus, don't be surprised that people want nothing to do with Jesus. Again, not to spoil next week, but Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple for a reason. Therefore, let us heed Jesus' warning. Jesus condemns bad religion. Let us strive to not fall under that condemnation. Having said all that, before I conclude, I did say this sermon was about two things. Remember, I'm arguing that Jesus condemns bad religion and vindicates the widow. Now, I don't want to get ahead to Advent, but I want to quote the Magnificat, Mary's song in Luke 2, when she finds out that she will give birth to Jesus. She sings that He, God, has filled the empty with good things, and the rich He has carried empty away. How does Jesus vindicate the widow? He will vindicate the widow and all of us who are victims of bad religion, who are in Christ, at the resurrection of the living and the dead. He will fill the widow with good things and send those that took advantage of her empty away. And church, Jesus isn't up there looking idly. He empathizes with you greatly. On the cross, Jesus was a victim of bad religion. He was set up by the religious leaders of his day. But he did not stay dead. He was resurrected. And that resurrection is our hope. Because one day, bad religion will not exist. And those of you who took advantage of you, and heck, even if you took advantage of others, today is the day of salvation. There's still hope for you. But all of those who took advantage of you, that are unrepentant, they will be carried empty away. Jesus will set up a new creation where there will be no more injustice. But we will live in a world where all things have been put to right. All of that to say, I can't fix your today. I cannot promise that tomorrow will be easy, or the next day, or the day after that. But I can promise you a better tomorrow in the sense that the resurrection of Jesus is our future, because we will be raised with him. Therefore, church, look at Jesus. Jesus condemns bad religion. He has no patience for people who take advantage of you in the name of God. And don't let other people tell you otherwise. Indeed, Jesus vindicates the widow. He will not abandon the least of these, but raises them and all of us who cling to him on the last day. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.